Hey, who am I talking to?
That was Stuart saying hello before everyone else. Hi, Carla.
Hello, Stuart.
Stuart, how are you?
Great.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's always nice for Dr. Paul of hearing where people are calling in from.
Is this Megan?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh my goodness, I butt
Go
dialed
ahead.
you. But I'm gonna tell you something anyway. Just hold on here. I got it.
Oh, that's okay. Well,
Good
we're gonna
evening.
get you
Good evening.
started.
Good
Tell
evening.
us where you're calling in from.
Good evening from Scotland.
Scotland. Welcome.
Hey, Scotland, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Dr. Paul.
From
From
Houston.
Denmark.
Houston and Denmark. Heard you both.
Corey and Delora from Daytona Beach.
A very
Welcome.
wet Surrey in England.
England.
Paris online. Paris online. France.
Welcome.
From Latvia.
France.
Latvia, France. Heard you both.
Spain.
from New York.
Canary Islands, Spain.
Welcome.
A very cold Chicagoland.
Welcome.
Sweden.
California.
Germany.
Sweden.
Southeast Texas.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Everyone in
New
UK.
York, USA.
London.
Oregon coast.
Oregon here too.
Welcome.
Mexico, Canada.
I'll ask everybody else to mute themselves. We're getting a lot of background there. There we go.
Hello from Finland.
Finland, welcome.
Thanks.
Hello from New York, USA.
Colorado, New York, heard you both.
Hello from Legoland.
Welcome.
Hello from Brooklyn, New York.
Welcome, Brooklyn.
Hello from Bristol, UK.
Welcome, welcome.
Big D, Dallas, Texas.
Hello from Minnesota.
Hello.
Hello from Phoenix, Arizona.
Welcome. I heard you.
Hello from Latvia.
Hello, Latvia. Wonderful. Okay, well, we are over the time, so I am going to mute everybody so that we don't have background noise because we want to be able to hear each and every word. Welcome everybody here on this call. Good to see each and every one of you. You know, we are so excited with the mission of what we're doing in Zinzino. The stories that we hear and the changes that it's making for so many people is so powerful. But what is it that really is driving the big growth in our company? Where here in the United States, we're growing with triple-digit growth. Well, from my own experience and my own family and how fantastic these products are really working, also to hearing so many other stories, we know that these products really work. And why are they working? And how are they working? We are so privileged to have a guest speaker on today who has been working on formulating these products. Not all of them, because the first, our balance oil wasn't his formulation, but working together with them and then adding on to create something that is really doing things to heal in our body. You know, our bodies are made to be healing themselves if they have the right environment for that. Now, he is somebody who has been working so much of his entire life to be making an impact on this world. He's the one who has written many books in regards to health, has served on many different places that have made an impact on world health. And he doesn't like to talk a lot about himself. He likes to talk more about his work, and that's what we're going to do today. So thank you for tuning in here today. I am proud to have on here our very special guest, Dr. Paul Clayton. Hello, Dr. Paul, and welcome here to our call.
Hey, Carla, it's good to see you. Good to be here and welcome everyone from all around the world.
Dr. Paul, you know, there is something that we entitled today that is a word that not many people have actually heard. And they set question marks like, what is all this about? Pharmaco-nutrition. It's a word that you kind of came up with, and we would kind of like to hear, what was this background of coming up with that and why, before we go on to find out what you've done with that.
Okay, the elevator pitch, I guess, but it's going to be a long elevator pitch. This goes back 50 years. And I had started working for the British government. I was the senior scientific advisor to the Committee on the Safety of Medicines, which is a little bit like the FDA. And I had been involved in creating dossiers, which were then used to decide whether a drug would be given a license for use or not. So I was looking through these dossiers and looking at adverse effects and side effects and contraindications and drug interactions, and it was a mess. And I knew that all these drugs we were releasing, I mean, that was the time of the pharmacological blockbusters. That's when they really started. It was the age of what they called rational drug design. And I was seeing such a lot of damage being done by these drugs. And I had been looking at natural pharmacology. I'd been studying that in parallel with studying synthetic pharmacology. And it became very obvious to me that we should be able to find a way of using natural pharmacology in a way that would likely match the effects of synthetic pharmacology, if not surpass them, and do so a lot more safely. So I remember being present at this meeting of very senior medical personnel, basically the top talent in the UK, and all these gray bearded old professors, dusty old professors. I mean, you know, I'm older than they were then now. And we were talking about this problem of drug toxicity, and we were all aware that we were damaging and killing a lot of patients. And I said, well, why don't we approach this issue from a different angle and start using the pharmacological attributes of foods and food extracts? And they said, yeah, well, what do you mean by that? And I think we should practice something called pharmacotherapy. And I was severely criticized on the grounds that pharmaco-nutrition, pharmaco-nutrition didn't exist. I mean, it didn't at that time. I just made up the word on the spot. They said, what even is it? And I said, well, it's cross-referencing all the metabolic steps that we know were involved in driving chronic lifestyle diseases with the known pharmacology of these foods. We should be able to prevent a lot of these diseases from ever developing. And they said, well, go away and prove it. Don't waste our time until you can. And it's now half a century later, and we are at the point where we are accumulating that proof. Finally, it's taken so long for what was such an obvious idea to be transformed into praxis. But I have to say thanks to a large extent to Zinzino, who've taken my ideas and they've taken them into the wider world and exposed so many hundreds of thousands of people to them, and so many medical scientists as well who've seen the results. Now, belatedly, this science it's on the verge of becoming respectable. And Zinzino is the company that's in pole position. It's beginning to attract a lot of attention now from my medical colleagues in many countries all over the world, many of whom are now starting to work with us because they see the impact of the health protocol in their patients.
So let's on a little bit, Dr. Paul.
Yeah,
So
I told you it was a long elevator ride. I'm sorry.
No, but it makes sense. And as you said, medicine, we've got a lot of pharmaceuticals out there that can do a quick trip, but there's also a lot of side effects to that. And as you said, it's one of the top leading causes of death. So finding another way just makes more sense. So how did you get started to do this? And I think it's kind of fun to hear that Zinzino believed that we could do this, because that's actually a fun story too. When you met Dog and Orion on that first time and said, this is what I think we can do. Could you tell us maybe about that?
It's an old story, but when I first met them, they were selling coffee. basically. And, you know, let's not be judgmental about that. We all like good coffee. But they had come across this little company called Oil for Life. And Oil for Life had developed this kind of, you know, balance oil, which they didn't develop actually. That goes back to the year 2001, when a couple of really good scientists from the universities up in Tromsø and even further north, they had developed this extract, which was based on seal oil and olive oil. They did the first work. They actually created the whole concept. And I was aware of that. And I'd been drinking not seal oil, because that's hard to find when you live in London. I was drinking fish oil and mixing it with olive oil and drinking large amounts of this. And I didn't enjoy it, but it was extremely effective in reducing chronic inflammation. So balance oil, which was being developed by this Oil for Life company, we got to know each other. And I realized that they had produced a much more palatable version of what I'd been looking at, what I'd been doing. And then Zinzino bought balance oil. And I was just, you know, I was like a filing cabinet in the corner of the office. I got swallowed up with the rest of that company. And I got to give Doug and Orion credit for this. They realized that I was going to be able to explain what balance oil was and perhaps develop it. And we had this early meeting and they said, well, would you like to come to work with us? And I said, maybe. And then they said, well, what would you want to do? And I said, yep, I'll work for you on one condition, that we become a life science company. And I think they probably thought it was pretty presumptuous of me to say that, because they did have a small but, you know, reasonably successful coffee business. But I got to give them, as I say, I got to give them credit. They took me on board and gave me enough time and resources to develop the companion products. So it's Xenobiotic and Extend. And those are really the three main legs of this health protocol, which is designed to reduce your risk of chronic degenerative disease right across the board. What it does, this approach, the health protocol, is to take your metabolism and send it back in time, 150 years, to a time before ultra-processed foods emerged, to a time when we were eating a much more natural diet, foods that we could fish and hunt and grow and forage, and to a time when chronic degenerative disease was very rare. It occurred at levels of only 10% of what we see today. And my thinking was, well, if we could reestablish that nutritional baseline that and correct people's metabolisms, we would reduce the burden of public ill health by up to 90%. And in a nutshell, that is what we see. So the majority of people who have a chronic condition who go onto the protocol, within a year or so, they become pharmaceutically independent. And that's why so many doctors and clinical scientists are jumping on board. They see their patients responding in ways that they have never seen before.
And you're saying 90% of everything that is these lifestyle diseases actually is something we can do something about, and what the health protocol actually combats.
Yes, which is a huge claim. A huge claim. And if you're going to make a claim like that, you need exceptionally good evidence, which I have to say, speaking as a scientist and from the heart, we do not yet have, because the kind of evidence that my colleagues want to see is the kind that you can only generate from randomized, double-blinded clinical trials, prospective studies, perhaps with crossover and with large numbers. This is what you really want to do. And this is where I hope we're going to be able to get to. So we don't have that kind of proof yet, but we have hundreds of thousands of case histories that are so unusual. We are seeing people whose conditions are stabilizing and then going into reverse, which doctors have not seen before, because they don't use the right tools. They use drugs. And they have the assumption that if they see patients with cardiovascular disease, neurological disease, and they see their patients declining over time, that's what happens. The drugs treat the symptoms, but don't reverse the conditions at all. They can only manage the symptoms. They can't cure them. And so doctors have acquired a way of thinking, which is philosophically completely incorrect. It's a form of medical nihilism. They believe that because the tools they use don't cure it, these diseases can't be cured. I mean, that's such an enormous and obvious philosophical fallacy. They're not using the right tools. If you use the right tools, these conditions can be stabilized, and yes, they can be reversed, because the body has enormous powers of healing. It has an enormous possibility of regeneration if you give it what it wants, what it needs, and if it's not overshadowed and crushed by the modern diet and lifestyle. Now, as I
So
said,
pharmaco-nutrition is in essence putting in the right foods and nutrition that your body needs to work the way it's supposed to. That's pretty much it.
yes.
So people are going to say, well, then we could just eat our way to the same thing of what Zinzino's doing.
Yes, you can, but it requires a pretty strange diet. Go back 150 years, and that's a time before motor cars, before information technology. You're going back to a time when people were more physically active than they are today because they worked predominantly with their backs and with their hands. I mean, we know in mid-Victorian England, the people were running at up to 7,000 or 8,000 kilocalories a day, 4 times as much as people eat today, because they were so much more active. And they were eating foods with a much higher nutrient density. So to try and get people who are driving a desk today, burning 2,000 kilocalories a day, which is very little in a historical context, you have to choose a very, very peculiar diet to cram all the different nutrients they need into 2,000 kilocalories. I tried to do that. I did some spreadsheet analysis looking at different foods with high nutrient densities about the minimum number of calories that you can get on a plate or a couple of plates, which will give you really everything that you need. You can't really do it below 2,500 kilocalories. So it can be done, but in order to get everything that you need, you've got to be quite physically active, and you've got to be willing to eat a very peculiar diet.
Okay, so, but this health protocol that you have worked to do, which is the balance oil, getting your body into balance, which is our extend the vitamins and minerals, and our xenobiotic, which is our prebiotic in the gut. That is going to be what would, in essence, be all of that food in one sitting by doing that every day. That's how it's working.
It's the nutrient equivalent of 2,500 kilocalories of a very odd selection of foods. So that would include like a big old portion of salmon or herring, or a handful of caviar, if your tastes and your bank balance will allow that. A whole lot of green leafy vegetables, a bunch of wheat bran, a bunch of Brazil nuts, and a couple of tablespoons of spice, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Now, you're not going to eat that, and it wouldn't taste very good anyway. So what we have tried to do is to extract the necessary ingredients in there and put them into a liquid, which is the balance oil, a powder, which is the xenobiotic, and 4 tablets, which is extend.
So with that, they also work together, right? So you are saying people shouldn't just take one or the other. It is meant to work together, all of them.
Taken together, they are the equivalent of, let's say, a 19th century diet. The diet that would have been consumed by people who were working physically very hard and who were eating local produce that they had grown or hunted or fished or farmed. And under those conditions, we know that those types of populations, they have a life expectancy which matches or slightly exceeds ours, but they have a health expectancy which is much better than the health expectancy we have. We can expect to spend the last 10 to 15% of our lives progressively dying, progressively becoming more and more ill. It didn't used to work like that. If you look very carefully at the health records of the period, let's say 1850 to 1899 in England, and it's very intensively documented, we can see there that people kept their physical, mental, and sexual health right up until the end, until the last weeks or days before they died. And when they did die, it was generally not of a chronic degenerative disease. It was from a fulminating or overwhelming infection, because they lived in very crowded conditions. The water wasn't really cleaned and purified in the way ours is. They had other vulnerabilities. Now, if you have clean air, clean water, reasonably unpolluted food, and access to the health protocol, I think that the overall impact of that would be shifting the life expectancy up by a minimum of 15 years and health expectancy by about the same length of time. I'm saying that as a minimum. I don't yet know, because we haven't been around long enough, what the far end of that possible curve, that bell curve, might be. But I think that improving life expectancy up into the average life expectancy, up into the mid to the high 90s, I think is absolutely possible now. And I think we're there, in fact.
I love that. And it's that quality of life, because I think a lot of people, when they're right now, are very aware of health conditions, and they're seeing the degradation of so many different diseases out there. So they're many times are trying to fix something. So many people have all these issues, and then they're trying to fix it. So they're looking at Zinzino saying, what can this fix in me? But we wanted to look at, from a very young age, to stay healthy. We think everybody should be taking this health protocol from a young age, and would need to continue it to keep that quality of life. But if there is something wrong, if they do have some type of diagnosis or disease of some sort, taking that health protocol, is that going to make a difference if they've already got something?
Oh, absolutely. But let me put it this way. It really depends on what point in the course of the disease you intervene, because there are event horizons. Let me express it like this. So let's take cardiovascular disease, which is relatively simple. You can see over time atheroma building up in an artery, which is really driven by chronic inflammation in the lining of the artery, in the endothelium. This is known as endothelial dysfunction. And it is this that drives atheroma formation. It's not really cholesterol levels, they're indirect. And that's one of the reasons the statins don't work particularly effectively. You have inflammation in the arteries. As a result, various types of immune cells migrate into the tissue, they die, and the cholesterol in the atheroma actually comes from these immune cells. It's not from the cholesterol that's circulating in your bloodstream. So what happens is, over time, you're living the modern lifestyle, which is pro-inflammatory, because you have chronic inflammatory stress in the body and in the gut and everywhere, all kinds of other problems. Then that inflammation will continue, their atheroma will increase, the blood vessels will constrict, your blood pressure will go up, and that's what people see. That's what doctors see. Their patients, generally, the hypertension will increase, and their atheroma will increase, until one fine day you have a heart attack or a stroke. And so many people go down that road. I could make the same case for cancers, by the way, or dementias. Now, if over time the atheroma develops, but the infarct, it hasn't yet blocked the blood vessel, it's perfectly possible to make that atheroma shrink, regress, and go back to normal, and to restore a healthy lining to the blood vessel, and a healthy endothelium, to a point where it can no longer support atheroma formation. That's relatively easy. We know that the medical profession already do this using an invasive technique called lipophoresis, where what you do is you take the blood out, you circulate it, remove a whole bunch of lipids, you put it back in, and that's a very crude and very aggressive and invasive way of forcing atheroma regression. We can do the same thing, more easily, much more cost effectively, and much more safely, by resetting your metabolism. That's the easy part. Now, if the atheroma has progressed to the point where, let's say, a plaque is ruptured, you have a total blockage downstream and a loss of viable tissue, that is an event horizon. With the tools that we use, we cannot reverse that. That is irreversible. So the whole point is to intervene as early as you can, as soon after a diagnosis as you can, and preferably even before the diagnosis. Because the types of lifestyle conditions that affect so many people today have long latent periods. That is, they develop very slowly under the surface for decades before they finally emerge. They get to a point where they're causing clinical symptoms. And you notice it, and you go to your doctor, and the doctor says, you have this and this. Actually, you've had it for the last 25 years. It was just building, and it was below the surface. So if we can get to you early after a diagnosis, before too much damage has been done, that's great. There's a lot that we can do. Even better, if you were smart enough to take preventative action even before the crisis occurred. You know that movie, The Seven Samurai, the first version?
Okay.
There's this section in the film where the head guy is recruiting potential samurai, and he's got this little trap set up inside this straw thatched hut, and one guy comes in and he's attacked and he defends himself and he's successful, and he said, "Okay, you're good enough to join us." And then there's another guy who's coming along, and and he said, "Why don't you come in and talk to us?" And he said, "Oh, no, I can see there's a problem there." And the leader says, "Ah, you're the person we need." So what I'm saying is, if you're smart, if you know how the modern diet and lifestyle is damaging you consistently over time and chronically and progressively, if you're smart, once you know that, you'll take preventative action, and hopefully you'll never even get to the point where a clinical diagnosis is made and the medical profession then decides to start filling you full of toxic pharmaceuticals.
I love that. And, I've always said I love to hear the stories too. And I know you love to hear them too, Dr. Paul. But I said I'm actually just as excited about all the stories we won't hear, because people are on the health protocol and they might not get all of these lifestyle diseases. You won't know, but I'm actually very excited for that too. So, Dr.
Okay,
Paul, you
let me just
mentioned-
stop you there. Let me just stop you. We're not going to prevent every case. We can't protect everyone, much as I want to do that, because there is a hardcore of people who have genetic risk factors, strong determining risk factors, and about 10% of the population is going to get through whatever we can give them, because they have a really unfortunate genetic hand of cards. So if we go back to the 19th century, they have the same diseases that we do, cancer, dementia, all the rest of them, but only at about 10% of the levels that we do. And I've said this many, many times before, you'll be familiar with this. That means that if we get the nutrition right, we'll prevent about 90% of the impact of these diseases at the level of public health. But the 10% of the people who have just strong genetic risk factors and who are the only people who developed these diseases back in the day, that 10% will still get through, and they will require different forms of crisis management.
I think that's important to say. I've also, one of the reasons I thought it was so interesting when I heard about the test and all of the things that you can do with the Zinzino Health Protocol is because my family has a lot of heart issues and cancers in the family. And I know that it doesn't mean that by taking this, that I won't get any of that. But I also know, Dr. Paul, that by doing this, I'm doing everything I can to protect myself. And I think
absolutely. I mean, Carla, nobody gets out of here alive, right? We're all going to get to an end point sooner or later, but I'd rather push it back because there's a lot of things I still want to do with my life. I'd like more time, and I'd like to be able to operate at something that's closer to my biological potential. I think most people never ever get that far. They never get to express that potential, and I think that's a tragedy. If we had a political class that actually represented the electorate and cared for them, we wouldn't be living the way that we do. But unfortunately, we have been captured by a kind of kakistocracy or a kleptocracy, if you will, people who have more regard for their pocketbooks than for our health.
And it's so sad to hear of that. Dr. Paul, you mentioned respiratory and things like that, but it's also, I hear so many people talk about that, when they're moving around and they're trying to stand up slower and things, even in my age at 57, they're talking about how it's just part of getting older. And I know you've said that is such a lie, and people are telling themselves a lie, that you don't have to feel like that's part of getting older. The
absolutely not.
body is the health protocol is gonna make differences for people in everything that they're feeling.
Well, we know that people those people who live in vestigial cultures, and we know from how people lived in the 19th century, that in those cultures where people had a much healthier kind of approach to life in terms of what they ate and how they worked, their blood pressure didn't rise as they got older. They didn't become more insulin resistant as they got older. In men, the prostate didn't grow. In men and in women, the brain, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortices did not degenerate. They didn't get demented as they got older. And like I said, a very small number did, those with strong genetic risk factors. But what has happened is, as our diet and lifestyle have degraded, everybody else has accumulated these types of problems as well. The issue here is really one of political and practical support. I think what we're doing represents the next wave, the next model of healthcare, decentralized, disintermediated, and outside the clammy grasp of the pharmaceutical industry and the health insurance industry. With this combination of self-testing that you can do at home, which provides numbers that we can share with other doctors, with other scientists, objectively verifiable data, and pharmaco-nutritional tools that we know will shift those numbers, we're putting nutrition onto, at last, a scientific basis. Now, I don't like nutrition. I don't like the supplement industry. I think it's a bunch of hooey. Most of it doesn't work, and it's been shown not to work. And my medical colleagues and scientific colleagues don't take any of it seriously because they know it doesn't work. It's been tested time and time again, and it fails. What we have for the first time is a very different approach, which is this pharmaco-nutrition thing, which is quantifiable, it's measurable, we can share that data, and we can see the numbers change as a result of using the pharmaco-nutritional tools that we've developed. It's bringing into being a kind of medical future where the point of healthcare can be delivered not in a medical clinic or not in a pharmacy, but either through networks like Zinzino or at a supermarket checkout. It takes healthcare and puts it back into the hands of the people who use it, who need it, rather than handing it over to the grasp of an elite, a medical elite, a scientific priesthood, if you like, who are absolutely trapped in a conceptual model that has its origins in the late 19th century and is really not very appropriate to the problems we face today.
That's powerful, real powerful. Dr. Paul, I got a couple other topics here that kind of tie into all pharmaconutrition. And our food, we know that, the gut-brain connection makes a difference. How about the health protocol for mental health?
Okay. Well, you can divide, let's crudely divide mental health into 3 different categories: neurodevelopmental, affective, and neurodegenerative. And that doesn't cover all of it. Everybody, I think, is familiar with the idea that the neurodevelopmental disorders are increasing. Now, some of that increase is probably artifactual. People are looking for it more. In some parts of the world, a parent can gain advantages for their child by claiming that status. And everybody wants to be special and the victim these days, like psychology, which I don't fully understand. But I think there was a real increase. I think there's a real increase. And there's quite good data indicating that not necessarily paracetamol or one drug or another, but actually chronic inflammatory stress increases the risk of a child while it's in utero going on to develop a neurodevelopmental disorder. And that kind of makes sense. As the brain is developing in the second and more in the third trimester, all these neurons are growing down the various tracks. They have a kind of a blueprint built into them that tells them roughly where to go. They grow down electrical and chemical gradients until they get to where they need and make the right connections. And then they make the connections, and those connections are pruned back depending on what that fetus in the child then experience, and then they regrow and they settle. It's very dynamic. And that process of mapping and migrating is very sensitive. It can be confused or sent astray by external factors. If you have a lot of chronic inflammatory stress, and we know this because we know actually quite a lot about the different types of situations which are more likely to give birth to a child with an NDD, then if the mother is flooded with inflammatory mediators, that seems to be enough to prevent these neurons from getting to the right place, from making the right connections. That aspect of it seems to be quite simple. It looks as if we can prevent a great deal of that by ensuring that the mother is not exposed to excessive degrees of chronic inflammatory stress during pregnancy. And part of that is nutritional, part of it is social and psychological. There's a whole package around that. The affective disorders, and now I'm thinking predominantly of anxiety, the anxiety conditions, and the various depressive states, and there's many of those, as you know, they seem to be, they involve clearly a degree of neuroinflammatory stress. That's a subset of chronic inflammatory stress, which affects reward systems, it affects motivation, it affects something called the ventral tegmental area and the hypothalamus. And this we can treat by, again, with the health protocol, which reduces neuroinflammatory stress, and its different components have already been shown to have positive effects in the areas of anxiety and depression. Put those things together, add Viva to the mix, which is this validated saffron extract that we've known about for 1,000 years, by the way. And what we're seeing is that most people on that kind of regime, the affective disorder becomes, it goes away in most cases, or it becomes very, very much more manageable. And I think this is something that's really important. It's well worth trying because the drugs currently used to treat these conditions are so defective. You know, the anxiolytics have serious, substantial addictive potential. The antidepressants take, quite a long time to start to work. When they do work, it's a kind of a deadening. You know, you don't feel happy. You know, it doesn't make you a more effective citizen. A subset who don't metabolize these drugs effectively. In the United States, there is the expression of going postal, which happened because one of the first cases involved a postal worker going out and shooting at his colleagues. And we've had Columbine and a bunch of other, massacres like that. And then if none of those things happen and your life changes and you start feeling better and you want to come off the antidepressants, the withdrawal symptoms associated with some of them are severe. People find it very difficult to come off them. So I don't like those drugs. I think they're pretty disastrous. And our approach is much easier. It is no addictive potential, no withdrawal effects. In fact, it reduces the withdrawal effects associated with the antidepressants. And it works within hours if you're adding Viva to the mix. No toxicity whatsoever. Then the neurodegenerative diseases, and probably the two that people are most familiar with are Alzheimer's and Parkinsonism. And I have now, based on the cases that I've been involved with, I'm routinely seeing people stabilizing and then recovering and really unprecedented degree of function. I'm not the only person who's seen this. Dale Bredesen has published a couple of papers in this area. A bunch of other gerontologists and neurogeriatricians who I know are also looking at this. We no longer have to feel, I think, fatalistic about those conditions that rob so many people at the end of their lives of sentience and independence. I'm beginning to feel more and more that these conditions, if they are addressed early enough, are partly and perhaps in some cases wholly reversible. So our thinking, my own thinking and the thinking of many of my colleagues about these chronic degenerative conditions is really starting to change now. We no longer assume in every case that once you have a diagnosis, it will inevitably progress. I think that, yes, it will progress if you're being chronically poisoned by the modern diet and lifestyle. Get that right, and the body's ability to heal, which is considerable, then starts to manifest itself. And it shows up in reduced clinical symptoms, and in some of the cases that I'm dealing with, complete restoration of normal function.
It's really powerful. I think so many people, we want to be healthy, but you need to do what needs to be done to get there. So the health protocol isn't the one-all cure-all, as you're saying. Changing the diet, staying away from the ultra-processed foods, and exercise, right? Those are what you would recommend that absolutely everybody should be also doing, is watching their food, exercise, health protocol.
I think that would be one way of producing a very much healthier society. I mean, at the moment, I know this is an international audience, but at the moment, most developed nations are spending about 10% of GDP, which is in itself a suspect figure, on healthcare. In the United States, because North Americans are so unhealthy, because processed foods, ultra-processed foods have taken root here more than anywhere else. And partly because you have an out of control health insurance industry. The spending is almost 20%. And if you look at the direction of travel, it's entirely negative. The population continues to get sicker. So I think we have the Medicoeconomics make it imperative, in fact, for us to take a different course. We cannot continue to afford this degree of fiscal drag. It means that our politicians are spending our hard-earned dollars and euros and pounds sterling, whatever other currency you use. They're wasting them on all kinds of other stupid projects. But if we could change public health to the degree that I now think we can, the savings in the United States would account to something around $4 trillion a year. Trillion, not billion. So now you're paying off the national debt and you're starting to pay down, you're paying off the national deficit and you're starting to pay down the national debt. So this is an inflection point, potentially, not just in healthcare, but in macroeconomic terms as well. Now, the science, I think, is getting to the point now where the obstacles between where we are now and this, the sunny uplands of pharmaco-nutritional health is no longer scientific. I actually think we've got to that point. The main obstacles are legal, they're regulatory, they're economic, and they're political. But I can perhaps end on a more positive note by saying that I'm starting to be approached by various political figures and economists in different countries who've caught a glimpse, they heard something about what we're doing here, and they're starting to think, hey, maybe we could save a lot of money here. That's what they're interested in.
Well, if that's what they're interested in, that's going to help also. But for me, and I think for many of the other partners, we love the impact that it's making on health from every child, no matter what age. And actually, this by giving that quality of life, I think so many people have talked about their energy levels, feeling younger. Skin health has been absolutely incredible. I know you don't like the word anti-aging. We just need to be aging healthily, but it really is making a difference. I think people, even if they're not interested in their health, if they knew they're going to stay younger, feeling and looking younger as they get older, that would make a difference too. Because I know you've said before, you said at a meeting, come and feel my skin. I have baby smooth skin, and you do.
Okay, I did that a couple of times back in the day. I mean, that was because I had just developed, the skin serum, which has done quite well. It's been voted top of table at a number of independent tables. And I was thinking, yeah, this really works. And people didn't believe it. So I said, hey, see what you think. And I don't know, did you feel my skin, Carl?
I was one of them. I definitely was one of them. Somebody said you should come out and check it out. And
I'm
yes.
embarrassed. I hate personalizing all of this. I was just using myself as a guinea pig. That's all. I don't do that anymore because plenty of people can do, use it for themselves. And
I use it for myself. And I would say, I really think that if you look back, I've been doing Zinzino for 15 years. I do feel younger. I should be 15 years older. And I seriously, every time I see it on video or something, I've been doing these calls for over 10 years now. So going back and looking, I'm saying, yeah, I definitely also look younger. I think the health protocol, I take skin serum. If I could bathe in it, I'd fill up the tub with it because I really totally believe in all the products that you've been formulating, Dr. Paul. But I think too that if people just understood, they would be starting Zinzino as young as possible, and we need to be getting the word out to as many people as possible for them to understand how important this is, not just for their body, but for brain, for their skin, all around. Everybody needs to understand the mission of what Zinzino is doing. So,
well, the last time, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the last time I went up to Edinburgh, I met some of the medical students I went to school with, and I went to university in 1968. So my peer group then, the people who went to medical school with me, they're now in their mid-70s, as I am. And I swear to God, Carla, they look like a different generation to me. Like they're old and stooped, and most of them are very unwell, and a lot of them have died. And you know, again, I find this a waste. I find it morally offensive. When you look at the public health statistics, that hides so many individual tragedies, so many people who have gotten sick and died long before their time. And this is happening to such large numbers of people. It's this slow motion, day-to-day Holocaust that is going on out there that we think of as normal. It is anything but. And at a certain
And
point,
here you come, Dr. Paul, with your baby smooth skin, looking great. But I think that's what you are, one of the best examples of living a life that has been working towards helping people with world health, but you are doing what you're saying. So you are walking the walk, talking the talk, and letting people understand that they can really do something about their health, for themselves, for their families, for the people that they know and love. But actually, it's really making a dent in world health. Where do you see this going, Dr. Paul? Where do you see the effect of the Zinzino mission of getting out there and getting the health protocol in every home?
well, we're growing incredibly rapidly. And what I'm starting to hear is that in some parts of the world where we're very well established, we're actually seeing the national health statistics start to shift, and they're shifting in the right direction. And we're going to see more of that as this continues. The healthcare settings are potentially so huge that even the most boneheaded and corrupted politicians is beginning to understand that there is something here that they can work with, something that they can offer their electorates. There are, of course, institutions who are pushing back against this. The pharmaceutical industry is aware of what we're doing, and they don't like it at all. And there was a time when I was getting death threats, I mean, quite detailed death threats. And that was when I started to write the blog, because I thought I need to take everything that I'm thinking has got to be made public, because then I'm no longer a threat. And more importantly, my children are no longer at risk. So that started this process of publication. Everything's in the public domain. And for any of you out there who haven't visited it, you don't have to buy anything. You don't have to buy my books. drpaulclayton.com. Everything's there with a ton of references. So for those of you who, like me, are geeks or nerds, I'm not quite sure what the difference is, you can look at those references, jump into the wider literature, and see for yourself where the arguments and the ideas come from. Okay, there's a bunch of questions coming in.
There's a lot of things going in, and I did just put that blog link in there also, drpaulclayton.eu, for people to go in and follow some of the incredible blogs that Dr. Paul does in that. And yes, there are lots of things people are asking in regards to different disease names, and we really are about out of time here. But I think if we're just talking in general, the health protocol is making that difference for people. And if people want to know if they need it, they can just use the test, take their gut test also, use a balance test, use a gut test, find out which your body is in need of. The health protocol is what we're going to recommend for everybody. And it is unique. There isn't, I guess, the uniqueness of the health protocol. Maybe we should just say there's nothing like it out there. I have talked to many different people in all these years, both doctors, nutritionists, and when they look at what's in our health protocol, they do say absolutely unique. This is not just a fish oil and some vitamins and get something for your, it is not just that. It is something totally unique and working, and we can prove it with the test.
Absolutely. And there are people who are starting to copy us now, this is, very flattering. I'm glad they're doing that. If you look at the overall fish oil industry, we're only a small part of that. And I would really like it if the other big fish oil companies were to start to produce a product which, instead of being ineffective and toxic, is actually going to be helpful. It's hard for them to change things around because they've been selling swimming pools full of fish oil for so long, they can't suddenly say, oh, here's a new version, and by the way, the old version wasn't any good. They're trapped in a way. And that leaves the door open for us and other new companies that want to get involved in actually helping public health. For me, in the end, it was almost like a moral imperative. All this science that I'd been studying in an academic context, it became so obvious to me that there was so much we could achieve in the public health space. In the end, I had to leave the academia mostly behind and get my hands dirty, and horror of horrors, work with a direct marketing company, which is what I'm now doing.
I love that. Okay, well, there's so many questions in the chat here that maybe, could you give us a deadline here, Dr. Paul, if you would be willing to answer some of those questions? Could we I have booked you for the last 10 minutes. Could we use those 10 minutes on some questions?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to just take a few of them. So somebody is asking in regards to the FDA, are the products, because I know that FDA doesn't approve supplements, and even though we are talking about our products as not in the supplement area, we are definitely pharmaco-nutrition. These work like food, so I hope people will understand there is a difference in that, but yet it's not, FDA doesn't approve supplements.
No, but if they thought there was anything hazardous in any way or dangerous with our formulations, that they would take them out of the market. So implicitly, the fact that they have not slammed on the brakes, that's a good thing. The FDA, I think, is an anomalous regulatory body, a bit like EFSA in Europe, TGA in Australia, and of course there's others all around the world. And in a sense, they're all facing backwards. They have this idea, well, we should protect people against snake oil. And that's one of the things they were designed to do. The science of pharmaconutrition has advanced to the point where we know how much positive things they could be doing if they were granted a more official recognition and status. The regulators haven't yet gotten around to that. They haven't really understood that. And I think they need to be briefed and reformed. And I don't know what you think about Bobby Kennedy. He's an interesting figure. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think that his attempt to change the way that the FDA and other regulatory bodies in the United States, including the CDC and the NIH, they're all sort of involved here, how they deal with health, with nutrition, all of that is starting to change now. You know that the food pyramid has recently been considerably revisited. And Bobby Kennedy has brought in a lot of new blood and fresh thinking into these dusty halls. And I think it's a step in the right direction. So I anticipate that from its current low point, if the Maha group is allowed to proceed, I do think that North American health will start slowly to recover.
I like that. Wonderful. So I have a question here from a gal who is a functional medicine practitioner and nutritionist. She doesn't recommend supplements with iodine specifically for her Hashimoto patients. And she would like your point of view on this specific topic.
No, I mean, if you have hotspots in the thyroid, if you have an autoimmune disease, so that includes Graves as well as Hashimoto's, one should be cautious of iodine. That doesn't necessarily mean you've got to avoid it altogether. In fact, that wouldn't be particularly wise either. That's part of the background to the final design of Viva and at Extend. They're relatively low doses. But I understand this idea of caution. However, what I would add is that if your concern is autoimmune disease, there is a new way of thinking about autoimmune disease, which I think recasts it as a kind of translocation of enteric bacteria. When I went to medical school, there were only about a dozen autoimmune diseases known, and they were considered to be uncommon. Now, I think we're up over 120 at latest count, and they've become very significant in terms of public health overall. What's wrong with this picture? I think what has happened is we've seen a huge increase in dysbiosis over the last half century for reasons which are by now quite well known. And as a result, you've got a situation where you've got translocation of enteric microbes into the bloodstream, and then they settle down into various other tissues, into, for example, the thyroid, the pancreas, into different tissues within the joints. And they're inside the cells there. These are intracellular pathogens. And so the cells, your host cells, your own cells, are expressing bacterial fragments on their surface, which is what happens when you have an intercellular infection. The immune system is recognizing them as being microbes that are not in the right place. It's trying to attack them and destroying the host cells incidentally. So, you know, the host cells are not the actual target, the primary target. They're collateral damage. And there are many immunologists who will say, well, autoimmune disease, the immune system reacting against self, should never have been possible. It isn't possible. Maybe a lot of autoimmune disease is not really autoimmune. It is actually an immune response to an intracellular disease in some other tissue where those microbes should not be. And to support that, there is actually quite good evidence now that some of these autoimmune diseases can be cured by long-term administration of antibiotics, but only those antibiotics which are capable of killing intracellular pathogens. So there are other antibiotics which you can actually access online. There's one called Ocean, which is an amplification of the body's own innate immune system. That seems to work extremely well. That'll clear out these intracellular pathogens, at which point the immune system will no longer attack the so-called target tissue. So if you're concerned with the thyroid, that is what I would use. I would at the same time implement a very strong anti-inflammatory regime, because when the immune system is attacking the target tissue, it's destroying it through a process of chronic inflammatory stress. So stop that, bring that under control by dropping the 6-to-3 ratio to, let's say, 3, 2.5, maybe even 2. Bring the 3 index up to 8 or above. Use this antibiotic, this Ocean product, to remove the pathogens. And that's how I cured myself of Graves. I no longer have Graves. And that was 16 years ago. And I've been euthyroid ever since.
Powerful, powerful. Well, Dr. Paul, that used up our time. I just want the last question. In regards to the future, what do you see as what the impact of Zinzino can be doing here in the future? Or what would you like to see the impact of what you have created with the health protocol for the future? We'll end on that.
Look, well, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see the pharmaceutical industry brought under control, because it is out of control. They have such an unhealthy degree of influence on medical curricula, medical training, and on medical practice. If you watch American television, as I occasionally do, every 10 minutes, it seems, you're being interrupted by an appeal or a sales pitch for some other biological, one after another after another.
Mm-hmm.
And the North American population is so saturated with these types of commercials. I think you barely see them anymore. You know, ask your doctor if this is right for you or that is right for you. Should the pharmaceutical industry even be talking to patients directly? America is one of only 2 countries in the world where that is allowed to happen because of the degree of influence the pharmaceutical industry has. I don't think that should be allowed. I would like to see, as I say, the pharmaceutical industry shrunk to a fraction of its size. And if we can reduce the burden of public ill health by up to 90%, which all the data tells us we can do, at that point, most of the pharmaceutical industries go out of business. The ones that are left are very much smaller. They're no longer front and central in any doctor's medical approach. They're held in reserve for those few who don't respond to pharmaco-nutrition. And then I would like to see hospitals and cancer clinics being shut down. If we can reduce the numbers of people developing, you know, the types of medical problem that require tertiary medical care, if we can cut that demand off at source, then the current cancerous growth of medical facilities of this type will be stopped and checked, and that will be forced to regress as well. If we can become a very much healthier country, then the pharmaceutical industry will no longer be able to contribute, as it currently does, to programming, because they're a major source of advertising revenue. They will actually have maybe a slightly more honest mainstream media. I say slightly. And it will remove one of the pillars of the deep state. I think that would be, this is one of those areas where health and economics meet politics. Medicine and health are fundamentally political issues. They're politically embedded, and it's a very unhealthy coupling. I would like to move towards a situation where that coupling is less important and perhaps broken.
I love that. Dr. Paul, I'm going to let that be the last word of the program here. We are so grateful and thankful for all the work that you do. It's given us that purpose of really making that impact in health. I know it's made a difference for me and my family, and I'm so excited about the future. I'm going to let everybody unmute here. Go ahead and thank Dr. Paul. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for taking time.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you
Dr.
so
Paul.
much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul.
Magnificent.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Appreciate everything you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you, Carla.
Until next time. Until next
Bye.
time.
Until next time.
A pleasure listening to you again.
Merci beaucoup.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.